The sea was quiet that night, the kind of quiet that makes you wonder if the world has paused just long enough to catch its breath. Waves lapped against the Carolina shore, soft and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of a land untouched. No lanterns flickered, no voices carried through the pines. The colony was gone. For centuries, the disappearance of over 100 English settlers on the small island of Roanoke has remained one of history's most haunting mysteries. There were no signs of violence, no graves, no farewell letters, just a single word, carved deep into weathered wood: Croatoan. Was it a clue, a cry for help, or something darker, something lost to time? Tonight, we're going back to the fog of 1587, back to the edge of a vast, unfamiliar continent, back to a colony that should have survived, but didn't. This is not a ghost story, and yet it feels like one. Because when a community disappears without a trace, what's left behind is more than a mystery. It's an echo, a question that refuses to be answered. This is the story of Roanoke, the first English attempt at settling the New World, a story of ambition, isolation, survival, and vanishing. Settle in, dim the lights, let the tide carry you to a time long before ours. A time when the world was still unknown, and the sea could swallow secrets whole. Welcome to Sleepless Documentaries. Before Roanoke disappeared, it had to be imagined. And before it was imagined, it had to be wanted, desperately. The 16th century was a time of maps unfinished, oceans unexplored, and empires clawing for more. Spain ruled the seas. Its galleons carried gold from the New World back to Madrid, feeding an empire of immense power. France and Portugal followed suit, but England watched from the sidelines. That was about to change. Queen Elizabeth I, fierce, calculated, and ambitious, believed it was England's destiny to plant its flag across the Atlantic. Not just for glory, but for survival. Colonies meant trade. Trade meant power. Power meant security. And into this dream stepped one man, Sir Walter Raleigh. Dashing, determined, a court favorite. He offered Elizabeth a vision of English presence in the New World, a Protestant outpost in a land rich with promise. Raleigh never set foot on the soil himself, but he organized the effort. He secured a charter, raised funds, and promised something extraordinary: that an English colony could take root in a foreign wilderness and thrive. To the English mind, the New World was blank space, ready to be claimed, conquered, and cultivated. But it wasn't blank. It was alive, with people, with traditions, with tensions no outsider could fully grasp. Still, the dream was too powerful. In 1585, Raleigh's first expedition set sail for the coast of North America. They would name their new home Virginia, in honor of their queen, the Virgin Queen. They chose a small island just off the mainland, Roanoke. What followed was not triumph, not yet, but trouble. The land was unfamiliar. Supplies dwindled. The native tribes were wary and sometimes hostile. Within a year, the colony was abandoned. But the vision didn't die. 2 years later, in 1587, they tried again. This time with families, women, children, a real settlement, a new beginning. And so the stage was set. Not just for hope, but for disappearance. The age of exploration had delivered them across the sea. But what waited on the other side was a silence that still hasn't been broken. In the spring of 1585, 5 English ships slipped from the docks and into the open sea. The wind carried them westward, not just toward a new land, but toward a new identity. These were not settlers in the traditional sense. They were soldiers, sailors, and explorers. 108 men, no women, no children. Their goal was not peace, but presence. Their leader was Sir Richard Grenville, brave, commanding, and quick to anger. Alongside him, the brilliant and observant Thomas Harriot, a scientist tasked with understanding the world they were about to enter. And John White, the artist whose drawings would become the only visual record of a people and place about to be changed forever. After weeks at sea battered by storms and setbacks, they arrived at Roanoke Island, just off the coast of what we now call North Carolina. At first, the land seemed promising. The soil fertile, the forests thick, the rivers teeming with fish, but beneath the surface, tension simmered. The English encountered the local tribes, the Secotan and the Croatan, who watched the newcomers with curiosity and caution. At times they shared food and knowledge. At other times, suspicion ruled. One misunderstanding, one insult could ignite violence. And soon, it did. After a missing silver cup was blamed on the natives, Grenville retaliated harshly. burning an entire village to the ground. A brutal message, and one that would not be forgotten. The months that followed were filled with friction. Supplies ran low. The men grew restless. Hunting was difficult, the land was wild, and the relationships they needed to survive had already been scorched. As the colony struggled, Grenville left for England to gather more provisions. In his absence, the famed Sir Francis Drake arrived unexpectedly with ships, supplies, and the offer of rescue. The colonists, weary and worn, accepted. They abandoned Roanoke, leaving behind only a handful of men and a failed dream. Just weeks later, Grenville returned with fresh support, only to find the island deserted. Frustrated but unwilling to give up, he left behind 15 soldiers to maintain England's claim to the land. What happened to those 15 men remains unclear. They were never seen again. But Raleigh and Elizabeth still believed one failure was not enough to end the vision. In 1587 they would try again, and this time the colony would look very different. By 1587, hope had not yet withered. The first colony had failed, but Sir Walter Raleigh remained convinced that Roanoke could still be England's foothold in the New World. This time it would be different. Not a military outpost, but a settlement, a true community. 117 colonists set sail from England. This group included farmers, craftsmen, and for the first time, women and children. They brought with them tools, seeds, books, and dreams. At their head was John White, the artist from the earlier voyage, now appointed governor. He had seen the land before, he had drawn its coastlines, and now he would help shape its future. Among the passengers was White's own daughter, Eleanor Dare, who was pregnant when the journey began. Her child would become the first English baby born in the Americas. They arrived at Roanoke in mid-July, but the signs were grim. The 15 men left behind by Grenville were gone. No graves, no remains, just an empty fort and uncertainty in the air. Still, the settlers pressed on. They rebuilt the fort, planted crops, and began carving out a life. On August 18th, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter, Virginia Dare. Her name became a symbol of the colony's promise. A baby born in the wild beneath pine and sky, far from the crown that had sent them. But promise quickly turned to peril. The soil was sandy and thin, fresh water was scarce, and tensions with native tribes, already strained from past violence, ran deep. By late summer it was clear they needed more supplies, and only one person could make the voyage back to England, John White. It was a painful decision. He left behind his daughter, his granddaughter, and more than 100 colonists who depended on him, but he believed he'd return within months. He didn't know that England was about to change. Just days after his departure, war erupted. The Spanish Armada loomed on the horizon. Every English ship was conscripted for battle, and for 3 long years, John White was unable to return. 3 years of silence, 3 years of wandering. And when he finally did return, nothing was as he left it. 3 years had passed. Seasons had turned, wars had been fought, and across the sea John White dreamed of home, not his home in England, but the fragile colony he'd left behind on Roanoke Island. When he finally returned in 1590, it was late summer once more. The ship approached the familiar coastline through storm and surf. White scanned the shore for any sign of life, any flicker of movement, any glint of firelight. There was none. They reached the island at dusk. The air was heavy with salt and silence. Trees stood like sentinels. The fort, once bustling with settlers, was still, broken, empty. The houses had been dismantled. Tools were gone. No bodies, no graves, no sign of struggle. But there was one clue. On a tall wooden post, carved deeply into the grain, was a single word: Croatoan. It wasn't a word of despair, not a message of danger. There was no cross carved above it, a prearranged sign that they were in distress. Instead, it seemed intentional. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island and of a native tribe known to be friendly to the English. Had the colonists relocated? Had they sought safety there? White was hopeful, but the sea was not. A violent storm closed in, forcing the ship to abandon the search. No rescue mission followed, no second expedition. John White returned to England and never saw his family again. He died without answers, and so the mystery was born. 117 men, women and children vanished. No letters, no voices, just the carved word and the silence of the trees. History has a way of holding its secrets, but that has never stopped us from asking, what happened to the lost colony of Roanoke? Over the centuries, scholars, storytellers, and searchers have proposed answers, some grounded in evidence, others born from the shadows of imagination. The most widely accepted theory is the simplest, that the colonists moved south to Croatoan Island, now known as Hatteras. There, they may have been absorbed into the friendly Croatan tribe, adopting their language, their customs, and disappearing into their world. Supporting this idea are later reports from settlers who claim to have seen indigenous people with grey eyes, who spoke English words, or who lived in European-style homes deep in the woods. Another theory suggests a harsher end, that the colonists tried to survive on their own and succumbed to starvation, disease, or conflict, either with local tribes or within their own ranks. Others believe they tried to sail back to England in makeshift boats and were lost at sea. Some point to Spanish spies. At the time, Spain still controlled parts of the Americas. Could Roanoke have been wiped out by secret attack, its memory erased by silence? And then there are the stranger ideas, that the colonists fell victim to supernatural forces, that the island was cursed, that the forest whispered with ancient voices unwilling to be disturbed. These are the stories told around fires, in old books, on long, quiet nights. But without evidence, the truth remains just out of reach. The Lost Colony is not just a historical mystery, it's a mirror, a reflection of our fear of the unknown, our desire to find meaning in absence. It is a puzzle with missing pieces, a page torn from time. And so we are left with the word Croatoan, a single name carved into wood echoing through the centuries. The story of Roanoke is not one of conquest or glory. It is a whisper, a shadow, a question that lingers just beyond the light. In a world that often celebrates certainty, Roanoke reminds us of the power of the unknown, of a time when maps were unfinished, and every shoreline held both promise and peril. What became of those men, women, and children? Did they live on, quietly blending into the land they once sought to tame? Or were they lost to time, their voices swallowed by wind and wave? We may never know. And perhaps that's the point. Some stories are meant to remain mysterious, to stir the imagination, to remind us that history isn't just facts in books, it's lives lived in uncertainty, decisions made in silence, and dreams left unfinished. As you lay here tonight, listening to the echoes of this tale, let your thoughts drift, like those first wooden ships across quiet waters, toward places we may never reach, but always wonder about. Good night, and may your dreams carry you gently through the forgotten chapters of time. If this story stirred your curiosity, there are many more to uncover. Subscribe to Sleepless Documentaries for quiet journeys through history's greatest mysteries. And if Roanoke left you wondering, let us know your theory in the comments below. Until next time, sleep well and stay curious.